Mark, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here. Yeah, excited.
So you are the founder of Men's Therapy Online. So tell me how that got started.
Yeah, so very long story short, I'm in recovery from substance abuse. I've been sober for 10 years. And in that, you do a lot of personal work. I did a lot of therapy, did AA, did a lot of retreats, right? Just stuff to like self improvement, right? And after doing that, I got sober pretty early, like in my 20s. I got out of it and I realized that I couldn't connect with other guys, right? I like couldn't connect with other dudes that had been on the same path. I couldn't find them. A lot of the guys were still into, drinking and girls and partying and all that kind of stuff, which is fair because I was also just there, right? I just went too hard into it. So I wanted to create a community of guys that can connect around self improvement, basically using therapy as a vehicle. So MTO, Men's Therapy Online, it is, therapy is the vehicle, but really we're building a community of guys. So we have tons of interlocking things. We have tons of groups. We have retreats. We have an online Slack channel. We're always kind of pushing guys towards interacting with each other and creating community bonds because I feel like our side doesn't really, we don't have that. We don't have places where we can just meet and help each other get better.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a massive lack of spaces these days for people to connect outside, especially I think with COVID, there's kind of disappeared and no one really wants to do the in-person thing anymore. The online route is just a lot easier and a lot of the friction, the level of friction is a lot less to just do everything over a text or a call rather than meeting anyone in person anymore.
Yeah, it's a lot easier. I live in rural Colorado, a small town called Evergreen. So there's a lot of like mountain people, Mountain West people that we serve that don't have access to a large enough community to do in person. So we're helping to connect with guys that live in more rural communities, more blue collar folks as well that aren't in major cities. And like you're saying, like I think COVID killed a lot of it, and also our society killed a lot of it, right? Like I think the two major places men used to meet, number one was church, right, which is going downhill, right? Not many people are interested in church and joining all that. And the other one is the bar, right? And if you're looking at self improvement, you're not going to meet your self improvement buddies at the bar, right? Because you probably moved beyond that to some extent. So it's really hard to find other guys that are improving, and online forums seem to be the place that guys are collecting and having these conversations.
So I guess that third place needs to be more of a constructive environment where people can kind of go to interact with the kind of people they want to be associated with rather than what you end up getting lumped with, what you're expected to be when you're growing up as a guy.
Yeah, absolutely, right. And better than the common pool, right? Like there's people trying to have these conversations. I'm sure you've interviewed some of them or you're aware, right? On YouTube comments, right? Or on X and Twitter comments and Facebook groups. And like that sucks, right? Like it sucks. It's like deeply impersonal. It's a lot of attack. It's a lot of like, it's not real relating. There's no long-term relationship. So something like our online men's group, right? Like we keep them small. They're 6 people and it's meeting weekly for 90 minutes. So like pretty quickly these people become very important. I mean, I don't know about you, I'm curious. Like I don't talk to most of my friends every week for 90 minutes, right? That's like a lot of social time for a guy to be regularly interacting with people. So you get a lot of like close connection that way.
Yeah, I recently moved for an internship, so I don't and a lot of my friends they're either at university or they're from school. So honestly, you're kind of right. I don't really see my friends that often, maybe once every 2, 3 months, and like text them like once a
Right.
couple times a week. Like it's a bit no, no, no. I say it. Yeah, it is a bit like I kind of just don't realize that I'm not really interacting with that many people on a weekly basis. Like, who do I actually interact with? Like my workmates. I see my girlfriend. I even my parents because they live like couple 2, 3 hours away. See them like once a month. So I guess it's like difficult now to find people. I guess that are aligned on the same path I am.
Yeah, totally. And that's normal, right? Like that's why I created the company, right? Like I was in the exact same spot. A lot of dudes, we don't realize how isolated we are. And we don't have places, like you said, to connect regularly and over time. And like friends are great, right? The check-ins are great. Like I do a lot of weekends with friends. I'll do camping, backpacking. Like I'll do like kind of like bursts of connection. We'll spend like 3 days together straight, in the woods or something. But that regular connection, even though this is my company, I struggle with that personally. Like I see my group members that I run right more often than I see my friends. But those types of connections I think are really important. And I think that's where the foundation of society and culture was really built upon. When you look at, you know, historical and traditional cultures, right? Like we were more connected because we had to be in order to survive, you know.
We were in like tribes and things, so I guess that's how we're wired, and we're not used to this idea of being so far apart from people and groups. We're not really in colonies anymore.
Right. Yeah, we don't have that survival need. I mean, again, when I work with people in rural Colorado, like we need our neighbors. You know, we had a couple months ago, we had a 4 foot snowstorm up here, which was crazy. And like I have a plow truck, it got wrecked, it crashed. So I had to have my neighbors help me recover that. And then I could take my plow truck and plow their driveways. So like a very simple example, but like because I live in kind of like a hostile environment, we need each other. But I think in like urban environments, we really don't. You know, it's very easy, and many men live working from home, ordering from Amazon, doing DoorDash, right? Like just kind of being in a little bubble where they don't have to meet their neighbors and interact. So
The
we're trying to just
minimum level of friction. Yeah,
yeah,
just the absolute minimal level of any sort of human interaction. Like you get excited when you see the little QR code on your table. It means you don't have to interact with a server. Like there's the level of just absolutely never having to talk to anyone. It's so easy to do. Like I think I remember someone saying to me, it's like, especially during lockdown, I was like, how many days did you actually go and not speak to anybody? And when I thought about it, I was like, probably way too many for my brain to even comprehend the fact that I just went a whole day, didn't speak to anybody, and then just woke up the next day and did the same thing. Like, yeah, and I was listening to a podcast, and there was a study by Robin Dunbar, and he was discussing the amount of time men need to themselves or in their own communities, and basically the conclusion was that men need 2 guy nights a week. So how could someone carve out that time in such a difficult schedule that they may have as an adult to actually find time to be with their friends, basically? Because I think a lot of people think, oh, I'd love to, but they just feel like they could never find the time in their schedule.
yeah. So I think that's a myth, right? Like I think a lot of people are not as busy as we think we are. You know, when I talk with the guys that are busy, it's kind of one of two archetypes, right? The first is if they're single, right? When they're busy, they're actually not busy. They're typically home alone, either like watching TV or drinking or smoking weed or something. Like they're relaxing, but it's not really relaxing. You know, it's numbing, it's pushing things away, it's avoiding, like you said, avoiding friction, you know, and I'm of the belief, you know, I'm curious what you think too when we look back around. Like I'm a believe that I think friction and challenge make men strong, right? Interacting with people that are different from us make us smarter, right? Interacting with challenges force us to grow. And I think if we're on this trajectory of wanting to reduce friction and everything being easy, we're going to become weak, quite frankly. We're going to really like not be able to function in society and be forced to grow because we can just click a button and make it happen. So, you know, back to your original question, right? Like, I think to carve it out. So the first archetype is like you're single, you're alone, you have way more time than you think you do. Something like an online men's group is a good place to start. But even though I'm a therapist, I would recommend also finding like a hobby, a shared hobby, because men grow through doing projects together, right? And there's also some good footage, like good research footage where they would study groups of men versus groups of women, and men love being in silence, right? There's something very masculine about like fishing with a dude and not talking, you know, or going on a long drive, or, you know, trying to like really focus on like a fine mechanical detail in fixing a car or tinkering with a piece of electronics, where like you're just both super focused together and giving your all to that moment. That's kind of male intimacy. We don't need to be talking all the time. Women like talking a lot, but we don't need to be talking all the time. So I think having one group that's talky and emotional, right, men's group, and then one that really isn't, that's really based on a shared hobby. The second archetype is people with partners, right? Often I'll talk about heterosexual relationships because that's the most common, but it can be any kind of relationship that you're in. Often that's like codependency, right? It means, which is hard for a lot of modern men, setting boundaries with your partner and being like, okay, you know, Thursday nights is guys' night. Like I'm gonna go and I'm gonna do something with my friends. And you know, it's a better sell if the thing you're doing is not going to the bar in the strip club, right? Like it's hard for the partner to usually sign on that one. But if it's like, oh, like we're gonna go and we're gonna be hunting together, or we're gonna go on a fishing trip, or we're going to work on a craft project or something that is a healthy activity, I found that partners tend to be more accepting of that. But it takes us to set that boundary and to be like, this is really important for me, and I'm not rejecting you. I'm just choosing another group right now. And, we're going to be together, whatever, 5 days of the week. You're going to get a lot of me. But I think men struggle saying that to hundreds of partners. Yeah.
Yeah, I think firstly, to your first point, when you were saying how men can just sit in silence, I think we're just more easily satisfied. I don't know, like if you've seen the things, it's like men just there'll be a person like just digging a hole at the beach, and then a bunch of men will just get attracted to the crowd and just all help dig said hole, and women will just look like, what are they doing? But all the men just understand that they need to dig the hole,
Yes.
and I feel like it's not, it doesn't matter what you're doing. It's a sense of like community and doing it together is what matters, I guess, is what's really important. And secondly, when you were saying people in relationships need to put their foot down and say Thursday is guys' night, I think that ability to do that has been stripped a little bit. So I think if you looked at the comments of the Instagram post of the guy who said men need two guys' nights, it was just a lot of women going, God, you guys are so immature, you don't need guys' nights, that's like, how old are you? And I think that attitude needs to shift. Obviously, the activities you're doing needs to be a more mature type, but the idea that men spending time with men is automatically immature and something they don't need to do anymore once they reach past the age of like 25, I think is something that needs to be shifted.
I agree. I mean, this idea, I think a lot of men are afraid of that, of being like domesticated, you know, like having the wife, the kids, and like losing all their friends. That happens to a lot of guys. Like that's a real fear that happens to a lot of guys. And I think as men, like we need to be in groups of exclusively men, because even though we can be crude and we can be aggressive and we can be rude, it doesn't mean we're immature. That's like actually how we relate. We are kind of like clumsy, aggressive creatures, and we need outlets for that, right? Like, martial arts is maybe an elevated form of that. Like we need to be able to fight each other. That's just part of what we are. We're the apex predator of planet Earth. We need to be able to do that. We need to be able to build things together, right? We're builders, we're creators. Like we need to be able to have outlets for that, and have it not be judged as immature, right? Like that is really how we bond with other guys. Like you said, just digging a hole in the sand, like might look dumb, but you say that to any guy, and we're like, yeah, like totally get it, right? Like someone's car breaks over, and you see like four dudes clustered around, being like, oh, what's wrong with the car, right? Like we need that to some extent.
What do you think are some misconceptions about therapy, specifically for men? I think there's a lot of things people don't understand. So what are some misconceptions?
Yeah, there's a lot. So, and some of them are true, right? So I think the biggest one, which again is why I recommend therapy with male counselors if possible, is that a therapist can't handle our emotions. So as men, right, we are killers. Like I said, we're aggressive. We work from like a hunter killer aspect, right? So when we have a bad emotion, right, we're upset, we're angry, we're grieving, our instinct is kill it, right? Like destroy the emotion and go back to being happy. And what that can look like, in the unhealthy way, it can look like drinking or smoking or bottling it up. In a healthy way, it can look like expressing it, journaling, talking to other guys, working through it, whatever, right? But ultimately, we want to kill the emotion and we want to get back to baseline, right? The idea there is if a man is afraid of his own emotions, which many of us are, because our emotions can be dangerous. I don't want to minimize that. Like male emotions can cause violence, they can cause harm, they can cause rape, they can cause destruction. Like we are powerful, powerful creatures. And if we're not okay with that, and we won't share it fully with a therapist because we won't think that they will be able to handle it. And, it's a little bit taboo, but a lot of female therapists can't handle it. When a guy talks about a murderous rage that we can have, we can feel like, man, I want to fucking kill that guy, right? We're not going to do it, but we have that intensity. Or when we talk about our male sexuality, which can be extreme lust and domination, right? There are many female therapists, especially in the modern era, that's going to shame a guy for that. That's going to be like, oh, don't do that, soften up, temper it, like make it kind of like massage it, soothe it away. Whereas with a good male therapist, you need someone that's like, yeah, I get that. Let's dig into that with no shame. Let's try to understand like what is going on with those impulses, because like I said, we're very powerful creatures, and it's not about making us less powerful, which I think frankly a lot of female therapists do. It's about harnessing our power and using our power for our goals and for our family and for making the world a better place. So I got more, but I'll pause there. I'm curious what you think about the idea of like our emotions are really strong and we need someone that can handle it.
Yeah, I think just our emotions can be strong, but a lot of men struggle to say exactly how they feel. They don't know the words. So I was going to ask, how can someone develop a stronger emotional vocabulary that can help express their feelings more effectively in a way that they actually mean, rather than coming across in the wrong way, or just not knowing how to express it, so then not saying it at all?
Yeah, so I think it's kind of a two-stage process. The first stage is something I do in my group that is famous for any of my group members that are listening to me. I make people say very basic emotions. So the basic emotions are mad, glad, bad, scared, and disgust. Okay? That's it. You got 5. So I'll often ask guys like, hey, how do you feel? And they'll be like, oh, I feel like that person's an asshole. I'm like, no, no, no. One of the 5. Like I'll interrupt people and just get the basic emotional literacy there. So it's like, oh, you're mad. Okay, great. You're angry. Let's talk about the anger. So I think first step is like kind of figuring out your basic core emotions, which again are, I'll say it another way, right? Happiness, sadness, disgust, fear, right? And happiness. So those are kind of like the core ones. Then you can become more eloquent, right? Over time. There's a great tool called the emotion wheel. I'm happy to link it if you want to put in the show notes or something. You can also Google emotion wheel. And it goes from those 5 basic ones and just expands out into a bunch of different words that are more nuanced descriptions of those 5. But honestly, just starting with the 5 basic is a good one, and just practicing touching into being like, oh, what am I actually feeling right here? And a lot of men are going to be like, oh, yeah, I'm angry all the time. But really, it might be disgust. It might be fear. There might be more going on than just being pissed off all the time, because the only emotions guys are allowed to have in our society is anger, happiness, and lust, right? We can be like happy, horny, or angry. But there's so much more there that we need practice doing. Mainly grief is something that men need a lot of work on, is being able to grieve and being like, it's okay. Like I lost something. I need to feel the loss.
When you talk about grief, is there also an impact of earlier experiences in life, like childhood experience and stuff, that you find that a lot of men struggle to open up with?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think, yeah, there's so much to that question. So for young men, right, teenagers, young adults, we are proving ourselves. And it sucks because we know we're actually kind of dipshits, right? We don't know what we're doing. We're kind of like arrogant. We're trying to make things happen and we're failing a lot. And that's where a lot of shame gets born in men. Because men, I think by nature, are very hierarchical. We like climbing ladders. We like progressing. We like moving forward. We like leveling up. And at that beautiful age of teenager, right? 16, 15, whatever, we all of a sudden realize, fuck, we're at the bottom of the ladder, right? Across many dimensions. And that creates in guys that don't have proper male mentorship, which is most guys, right? Male mentorship is a whole other topic we can dig into. But they don't have a mentor to help them through that. They get really arrogant, or they get defeated, or they give up, right? They stop climbing the ladder, or they lie about where they are on the ladder. For me, I lied about where I was on the ladder. I was very grandiose, I was just like an asshole, right? Very arrogant, because I didn't want to admit where I was, that I actually had a lot of things to learn and to grow. So the idea is that when a man, because of those experiences, when they feel incompetent, they're going to get really defensive, because we want to be higher on the ladder than we are, versus doing what I think is the real masculine work and the real emotional work, which is realizing, okay, I'm not at the bottom, but I'm not at the top. I'm somewhere in the middle. And how can I grow and move up at a right pace? Because like I was saying earlier, it's challenges that make men grow. So we have to figure out the appropriate challenge so we can get better.
So how can someone reconcile the pressure to be that strong role model male person whilst also being able to express emotions and be more sensitive in a world that feels like those traits are being portrayed to be more and more mutually exclusive? Like you kind of can only pick one. You're either, I'm an absolute alpha male and I don't have any emotions, but I'm the strongest man. And then all the way on the other side of the spectrum, where it's like, I think I hate toxic masculinity so much and I think everything about masculinity is bad. Like where is the balance? Because I feel like you either get either or represented in media. There's not really a middle ground for you to be both.
Yeah, I think that's 100% true, right? Because I think we're losing and maybe have lost to some extent like that third type of man, right? The man that is able to wield his emotions and be powerful. So the common one that always comes to mind for me is Martin Luther King, right? If you listen to Martin Luther King's speeches, right, he's deeply an emotional man, right? He's a deeply spiritual man, and he's strong. Like there's no doubt that this guy is strong. He's out there, getting arrested by police. He's out there getting beaten up. He's out there like fighting the good fight, and he's deeply emotional. Even when you look at people like Winston Churchill, right? The reason some of those quotes are Franklin Roosevelt, right? FDR. The reason some of these quotes are so powerful is that they have this emotional tone to them, but they're embedded with strength. So I think there's a way as a man to express your emotions and not be a victim, right? Or not be a pussy. Because a lot of guys are afraid of like, oh, if I express my emotions, people are going to think I'm weak. But there's a way to be emotional from a place of strength and talk about masculine values, right? Like courage, right? Talking about courage, overcoming fear is very masculine. Talking about building mastery, right? Getting better at something, learning, iterating, growing, very masculine, also very emotional. Talking about being able to like hold and protect our loved ones, specifically our partners and our children. Very emotional. It's love, but there's strength to that, right? There's strength to really being able to show up for the people that matter to you. Honor and ethics is another one, right? Talking about the right thing, doing the right thing, being a good person, volunteering, helping people less fortunate than you, right? Those are all very emotional topics, but also very masculine, very, very strong topics. I think, yeah, between the like, anti-male complainer, right? Nobody wants to be that. And also the alpha male, no emotion, those guys are often very afraid. They're living in a sense of fear and insecurity because they're not in touch with their emotional world. So I don't know if it's an answer to your question. Maybe it's expressing a grief of, I wish that there were more male role models like, those great men of the past that were able to really blend emotion and strength together. Because I agree. I think we really need that. I don't know what happened to those great men. That's above my pay grade. I'm hoping to make the next generation of them, hoping to build them with my company.
I think there might be some unconscious level barriers that a lot of men have to reaching that point. Like they feel like they need to fit into some sort of box. Are there, what do you think those barriers may be? And is there a point where you think some of those unconscious things that stop us from becoming a better person might not be fully possible to eradicate?
Yeah. So, I mean, ask the question again if I don't give you the right answer, because there's a lot of ways to go with that. One thing that I think with that is, especially if you're talking about social media, right, and influencers, and even just influencers, we'll talk about experts, right? You can access expertise so quickly online. You can find the most ripped dude online, right? That will tell you exactly what to eat. You can find the most financially successful guy, the best investor. You can find the best dad. You can find the guy who has really optimized his nutrition. You can find the guy who's the greatest at sex, right? You can find all these teachers online, right? And I use teachers different from mentors because mentors is kind of what I talked about before. But you can find all these teachers, all these experts. And I think a lot of men, especially young men, they look at all these guys and they're like, shit, I am really shitty at all this stuff. Like I don't have any of this stuff going on. And I think it has us really give up and create these barriers to doing anything because we're overwhelmed with information. And we don't realize that these guys don't exist in a vacuum. So for instance, like the most jacked guy on there, the fitness influencer, is awesome at fitness and you should learn from him. And his relationships might be in shambles, right? I think of David Goggins as an example, right? Like awesome, incredible human, love listening to his books. And he's like on his fourth marriage and can't quite make it work, right? Like, but as a modern man that has access to all this information, we think we can optimize every single category, and you can't. I think like as men enter their 30s and into their 40s, there's this, again, another grief, another realization of like, fuck, you can only be good at like 2, maybe 3 things. You can be really good at them, but you can't be good at everything. And I think like the modern man needs to hear that so that they can start getting good at them instead of being overwhelmed by all the different choices there are for self-improvement. And I think also men need to be more okay with being mediocre, but being mediocre and progressing. Because I think when a lot of guys think of mediocrity, they think of being mediocre and being stuck. Whereas if you're afraid to seek challenge, it's going to be there. But again, there's a big humility component of being like, yeah, I like suck at this, right? Like I'm.
Oh yeah, I was literally going to say humility.
Exactly. Yeah.
Humility. Yeah, I was literally about to say it's just a humility thing, and I think a lot of people, their ego can't take the idea of not being the best immediately. I feel like I've fallen victim to that before. Mm-hmm. Like you start a thing and you're like, God, why am I not immediately good at this? Like it's like an entitlement almost. Like there's like the curve of not sure if you've heard of this. It's like a curve of how much you think you know stuff. So you
Mhm.
start here, and then you start right at the bottom, and then after like a month or 2 months of doing something, your inflated idea of how much you think you know is like sky high. And actually, you really don't know that much at all. But because you've done a little bit, you think you know so much. And then after a while, once you do stuff for a few years, your actual idea of how much you think you know goes back down when you realize, oh God, I was just being an absolute idiot. I obviously didn't know that much. And then slowly, then it creeps back up after a few years of actually putting the work in rather than this little burst at the beginning where you're like, oh my God, I've gained so much knowledge on this new topic or this new skill. So I must be the best at it.
Totally. Yeah. It's a Dunning-Kruger effect is what that's called. And
That is literally what I wanted to say, but I didn't know it was cool.
yeah, yeah. But I mean, that's great. I use it a lot with my clients. I'm happy you're familiar with that. I think that's like critical because back to our kind of earlier conversation around the lack of friction and like the weakness, I think, of modern men. Um, we can't deal with that crash, right? Like, I think guys get to that inflated part and then we get the crash. And then it's just like, shit, I'm a piece of shit. Shame comes in. We hide, we give up, and we don't go through the next stage, which is like the grind, right? Being like, okay, like I'm not a complete noob, but like it's going to be a long path, And I think anyone that's done a fitness journey can relate with this. Anyone that's done weight loss, anyone that started like a really complicated job, it's like, okay, like this is years, right? This is like years of grinding. I'm curious, are you a millennial or a Zoomer? What generation?
I'm Gen Z, so
Gen Z?
I'm 22. So
Okay. Yeah. So
yeah,
I'm curious. I'll talk about millennials, and I'm curious what message you guys got, right? So as millennials, our message was, if you're not good at it, you shouldn't do it, right? So much was about like natural talent, and like it was well minded, but it was like find what you're talented in, find what you are gifted in, do something that you love or do something you're passionate about. But the message that my generation got was like, if you're not naturally like an all star, you should just do something else because you're not like meant to do that, right? Versus the older generation, which I think was toxic in its own way, which was like, no one gives a shit what you're good at, just fucking grind and like do whatever gives you the most amount of money and figure it out.
mm.
I'm curious, what Generation Z, like what
I
message
think
did you all get around
Gen
that?
Z is somewhere you either as everything these days, particularly polarized. I think some people are, I'm just going to do exactly what I want to do, and I have no regard for whether I'm actually going to be successful or good at it. I just kind of do it. And I think the other end of the description is there's a lot of now like hustle culture where people are like, I'm just going to grind every single day, 7 days a week, 24 hours, like nothing, no stop until I'm somewhere successful. And there's not really, again, as per usual these days, any sort of middle ground
Yeah,
where you can pick something you enjoy, but also have something on the side which you also enjoy, but is more of a hobby, or like there's no balance. Not allowed.
yeah, not everything is black or white,
Yeah,
right?
I
Yeah.
think also just the once you're on the treadmill of whether you decided to be the grinder hustler or the I hate work and I will just want to do stuff I love all the time, you end up on a social media platform like TikTok, which then makes your feed exactly what you want to hear constantly. So then you never ever hear any opinions from the other side ever again. So I think now with Gen Z, once you have an opinion and the algorithm knows you have said opinion, you will never, unless you purposely look for the opposite side's opinion, you'll never hear the other side's opinion ever again. So once you're locked in a path, in Gen Z at least, I'd say, on your mindset on pretty much anything. So in this instance, following your dreams or being just a grinder, you're never changing that opinion, which is again problematic.
Yeah, because you're stuck in that echo chamber, and to you, right, everyone is on the same path as you.
Yeah, you don't see it as anything different being making any sense. You're like, oh well, it seems like everybody on in the world is doing this because the 50 people I've seen in my feed are all doing the same thing. So this must be the right way of doing it.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I think it's like, I mean, brainwashing, really. Right. I mean, ultimately, right. It's like because it really narrows open mindedness and gets people stuck on one track. Um, And yeah, I think it's like, yeah, because you have those two polarizing options, there's no room for nuance and there's no room for the gray. And there's no room even for like imperfection, which is part of human life, right? Like if you're a grinder, you got to be like winning and winning more and winning more and more and more. You have to be like, constant moving up. And if you're, kind of this more victim mentality, capitalism sucks, like I'm not going to work, I'm just going to like get taken care of. Like that creates this victim mentality where you're just going down, 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 right? There's no room for like the wiggle, which is life. You know, it's really linear from the way you're describing it.
One thing I would say, talking about professions in general, as someone who speaks to men for their mental health, do you think the pressure of being a financial provider is still something that a lot of men feel pressured into doing, or is that changing with it being less common for there to just be one breadwinner in a partner?
It, yeah. So I, let me see. I think both. So I'll answer with more detail. I work with a lot of guys that are, I guess there's a couple things. So one is like the startup guy. We're with a lot of startup hustle grind culture dudes, right? Who are like making money, crushing it. Like the numbers are going up, they're scoring points, but they ultimately feel empty because there's no connection. And oftentimes what they're doing is they're doubling down on their strengths, which is organizing, making money, running businesses, and they're not attaining their weaknesses, which is often a relationship and becoming a provider, right? Because as men, like financial security is critical, right? We need to do that. But I think in the modern era, because of feminism, which is, a good movement, we are being called to do more. We're being called to provide emotionally. We're being called to provide emotionally, spiritually, sexually, right? It's more than just finance. And I think these guys that really double down on finance over and over again, they end up hitting a lot of insecurity when it gets to those other things. The other side is, if you talk about I don't care about work, I'm just going to follow my passion. Shit gets real when you're like 30, and you realize like, shit, kids are expensive. Like living in the city isn't as cool because all of a sudden you're concerned about things like crime and you're concerned about things like pollution. You're concerned about things like, danger because you have this kid mindset of like, oh my God, like this is like a cool, edgy place for me to live. But like, do I really want to raise like a kid here? Like, not really. Or people that don't have the means and are living in a place with like a shitty school district, right? Or they don't have good insurance. So like, okay, well, being on Medicaid, in the States or not having insurance is fine for me. But now I have a wife and she's going to be pregnant. And like, what if she dies, or what if the kid is sick? Or what if something happens? Like all of a sudden the financial holes become really, really apparent for a lot of guys. So yeah, I think whether we like it or not, I think money and finances and security will always be a part of the male experience. I think like women are stepping up to that plate, which is really helpful because everything's just like really expensive right now, and I don't see that changing in any way. I think you need a dual income in a lot of ways. But yeah, I think that pressure is there but I think it surprises people more. I feel like in the earlier generations, they were born with that pressure and I was like kind of like beat into them. And everything they made was about, hey, I need to provide for a family when I'm older. Whereas I think with the younger generations, we like kind of fuck around for our 20s and then we wake up and either like we made it or we didn't. And we're like, oh, shit. Like the childhood is kind of extended, I think, like, the younger the generations are.
Yeah, I think we've managed to convince people that having a side hustle is the most normal thing.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of weird. I don't know if I'm the only one to think this, but it's like, isn't side, it feels like to me like side hustle is just a fancy way of jazzing up the way of saying second job. Because
Yeah.
I don't know exactly, obviously I don't know enough about economics to be really talking about this, but I don't know how exactly we've gotten to the point where having a side hustle is so normal that you kind of need one to have disposable income that's not just I'm going to get by. But I think that's a topic for another. That's a whole other podcast.
Yeah, well, I mean, to riff on that a little bit, I think it goes back to the point I was making a little bit earlier about the importance of community. We talk about our kind of like straw man that we're constructing here of like isolated, lives on Amazon, DoorDash, whatever, right? Like all that shit costs money, like it's a lot of like pure financial output to like live in an apartment by yourself, to order everything online, to not cook and order all of your food, to take a car service everywhere. Like it's expensive. There's just like a lot of shit, you know? Whereas I think with community, again, where I live in rural Colorado, like we save money because we do stuff ourselves, right? And that's the value set. Or we ask our neighbors for help. You know, like we cook food, you know, we do where I'm at Evergreen, the meal trains are really popular. I've participated in a ton of them. For people that I know, people I don't know. Where like if somebody is sick, the on our we have a Facebook group for like the town, they'll just put out a meal train and like people from the town just start bringing food to that person. You know, that saves thousands of dollars, right? Like someone's already going through medical expenses. Now they got like 4 weeks worth of food, home cooked, healthy food. Like that's awesome, right? The example I had about the plow truck, right? Like I'm out there helping my neighbors do landscaping and yard work where they could have paid probably a couple $100 to have a professional do it, right? So like I think the isolated man is also it's also really expensive. Whereas if we would lean more into community and like actually help each other, you know, crazy concept, it wouldn't be as expensive, right? If we, instead of paying for childcare, if we shared with our neighbors, right? And all the different parents take turns, you know, I mean, there's a ton of different examples, but I think those more community and cheaper structures are falling away where everything is mediated by money now. So there's like a quite high financial pressure to exist in this kind of modern way of being.
So you do wilderness retreats as well. Do you think that those have helped some of the people you've worked with become less dependent on these kind of quick fixes and become more independent in themselves to be able to do stuff for themselves?
Yeah, so definitely. I mean, one of the masking values that I think is universal, although I'm sure not every single guy would relate with this, but I think a big one is kind of self-determination and individualism. You know, I think as men, we feel shitty when we can't do something. So for my wilderness retreats, right, like we take guys out and we survive in the woods and the Colorado wilderness. I mean, we have different levels, right? So there's intro ones and then there's challenging ones. And I'll talk about challenging ones because those are the ones I like are more fun. But we're doing shit that's hard, right? I mean, we're summiting like serious mountains. You know, we're hiking in like dangerous conditions. You know, we are backpacking with weight on, going up altitude where you have to split food. You have to be really tactical about how much stuff you're taking. You can't just like throw whatever you want in your bag. You have to like really design what you're carrying because an extra 5 pounds could destroy you if you're hiking, 8 hours a day, right? So it's like a very tactical experience and guys really get off on that. And we learn to be interdependent, which I think is back to this community argument I'm making, like men really need. So when you're doing, our wilderness expeditions, we have one guy who is the first aid, right? He carries the med pack. One guy's carrying the cooking supplies. One guy's carrying a tent, instead of everybody having like their own little version of it, right? Which is super inefficient. It's like an army squad, right? Where like every guy has like a role, and men really thrive in that because it makes them feel important. If somebody gets hurt, like who you're going to go to because that's the medic, right? Like when it's time to eat, the person who's the cook starts working right away. Like there's this kind of like rhythm that is I don't even have to really talk about it, right? You just tell people like this is your job, and guys are like, sir, yes, sir. And I think men like really like that structure because everybody has a place. Everybody has a role. And we learn to live together and survive together, which is such a primal masculine thing, right? Going out into the wilderness and creating like a little community is what we've always done, right? I think that's like really what defines us as men.
I think those kind of experiences are what shapes someone's like personality and ability to be able to be independent. But I would say, how do you help your clients transition back into those insights that they get from that into their regular lives?
That's a great question. Yeah. So what we do that a lot of companies don't do is we do integration. We really focus on integration. So with all of our retreats, we have 2 integration calls. One is called a touchdown meeting, which is the Tuesday after. So our retreats are weekends. So they'll have this big insight. They'll have a really powerful conversation around a fire. We do nature ritual, which, I don't know, we're like burning shit in the woods, right? Or like creating effigies or doing stuff that like really is symbolic. And then you're right. Then you go into your life and you're like, shit, my life still sucks, right? Like nothing changed. So we do a meeting on Tuesday, which is a touchdown meeting of like, okay, you're here, you made it back. Like, what are you going to do about it? Like what commitment are you going to make? And it probably won't be as grand as what you thought you were going to do on the retreat because that's kind of like a ceremonial space. But what can you actually do as a action? And then we have a meeting 2 weeks later, which is like, okay, did you do it? Like we have an accountability meeting of like, did you take that step? Did you quit your job? Did you have that conversation with your partner? Did you sign up for the gym, right? Whatever it is, did you really journal about that thing? Did you have that conversation? Whatever it was, right? So we have that. And then, because we're kind of an integrated program, many of the men that go on retreats are either in our men's groups or then join a men's group. So now they're in that kind of weekly thing. So they can always reference back. I run 3 retreats a year, and I have guys reference a retreat that was meaningful for them like years later. They'll be like, oh man, that thing in December of 2021, like that was fucking crazy. And it's like, yeah, remember that? Right. So we're like constantly reiterating those experiences so they're integrated with people. Instead of just, chasing the high after the next one, being, again, it's all community, man. Like being held in community with accountability is what men need, because we don't have community or accountability.
I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit here, but could it be taken a bit if someone goes to these kind of things, instead of using them in a positive way? Could someone end up using it more as a form of escapism from their actual responsibilities? Like, how do you ensure that the benefits are sustainable and they're actually getting what they need out of it, rather than using it as a distraction tool?
Totally. That's great. I'm always open for debate, right? I think 2 things. One, because we have that long-term accountability stream with the men's groups, it becomes real. Because I was in Boulder, Colorado, which is like retreat capital. And there's a lot of psychedelic work, which I've done and is great. There's a lot of ritual work, which I've done and is great. But there's a lot of people that chase that like ceremonial space, that psychedelic space, right? Where like everything is so clear and everything's mystical. But like you said, they don't do anything, right? They don't change their job. They don't start exercising. They don't have that hard conversation with their partner. They don't do anything with it. So by having the retreats be kind of these milestones, but the real thing being the ongoing group, you're with a group of guys that, I'm facilitating, to call each other out, right? To be like, hey man, like that was a cool ayahuasca trip, but like, did you actually do the thing? Like you can tell your story 1,000 times, but like, did you actually do it? And back to the idea of men needing community and accountability, that's real masculine love, is accountability, is like coming from a place of respect, total respect, right? It's not about bullying or shaming. It's 100% respect, and being like, hey, I'm holding you to this commitment that you made because 1, you told me to, and 2, it's in your best interest, right? I'm not going to let you just like get away with it. So I think that's a big one. And the other one, right, is that we have trained therapists. That's what makes us different than other retreat outfits, is that all of our people are highly educated, right? We're all master's degrees and above. We're all licensed. We've done all this types of education to make sure that what we're doing is real, for lack of a better term. That's like, it's evidence-based. It comes from a methodology. It comes from deep theories. It's not something that somebody made up and just went in the woods and had like a boys trip, right? These are like very intentional therapeutic retreats that create long-lasting effect.
Is there any particular ways your understanding of therapy and the science behind it that directly influence your approach to these kind of things? And you also mentioned that you have a lot of the role of Buddhism affected your ability to do these kind of things. So how did people respond to that as well?
Yeah, so a couple things, a couple questions there. So the first is, I guess to bring it full circle, we talk about ceremonial space and ritual space, right? There's a shit ton of science showing that humans respond to ritual and they respond to storytelling, right? That's actually the best way to activate our memory and to induce change, is by having what's called a cathartic experience, which is like a large emotional outburst, because we remember that. Like if you think back in your life, and now when I think back, like I'll remember times when I cried. I'll remember times when I got really angry. I'll remember times where like there was a big quantum leap, right? There was a big shift. I saw something beautiful, or I had a powerful conversation with someone. Like the memory works in these like moments, right? Because most of our life is fairly mundane, right? And even though the change is happening long-term over time, these powerful moments is how the memory synchronizes it. So we leverage that system in our nature ritual. So I'll show a quick example, right? We ran one, we're running it again. We ran it last year, called The Burdens We Carry. And essentially, the basic structure of that retreat is we're summiting a mountain. We're doing a 14er, which is some of the highest peaks in Colorado, right? So it's a hard climb that you need to like use breathing techniques, and there's like snow on the top, and you got to use, spikes. It's hard to do it, right? So you're there, and I have them find something in nature, a rock, a stick, bring something on natural materials, whatever, that represents a burden. And the more uncomfortable it is, the better, right? So a heavy rock or a spiky stick or I don't know, something made out of thorns, right? Something that like sucks to carry. And the thing is like, okay, you're going to take this thing, this burden, and you're going to carry it up that mountain. And you're going to put it somewhere that's like uncomfortable to carry. So they're going up this mountain, they're already struggling, and they're feeling the weight and they're feeling the pain of something that is in their life, right? Something that is psychological, but now they've made it physical. And in that moment, and it takes hours, right? So you're like with it for a long time. So in those hours, you're feeling it, you're dealing with it, you're shifting it around, but you can't quite get rid of it. And you're really like acting out what your brain is doing. And then we get to the top and we have this circle. Everyone's more open because we've just done a big physical exercise, right? Everyone's connected because we've just done this together. There's a moments of like, oh, hey, you're falling. Let me help you, right? Like pull you up. There's like all these kind of like camaraderie moments. So the group is like really primed. We get to the top and we do this ritual where people talk about it and then they freaking throw it off the mountain. Okay. You throw it like 14,000 feet down off a mountain. That's why I make it for all natural materials. So it can just like, be part of the forest again. And you chuck it. And I've had guys like do that and cry, right? Because they've just had this visceral experience of carrying the burden and they get to release it. And, going downhill is easier than going uphill. So then they have this release where they're going downhill, they're chatting. It's a lot more comfortable because they're not carrying the spiky ass rock, and it creates this bonding experience where they now have this milestone that their brain can call on of like, hey, you shed this, you ceremonially shed this. And then we had that accountability piece that you asked about before of like, okay, now that you've done the ritual about shedding the burden, like, how are you actually going to shed the burden? Like throwing the thing off the mountain doesn't do anything, right? Other than creates a memory and a milestone that guys can call on when they need to make the more meaningful action in their lives.
It's like a representation of what they need to do, but they still need to follow through on that.
Yeah. It's like the jump start, right? Like the mind needs like these kickstart experiences to get it going, to start the engine revving. But the real work and the hard work is like the day-to-day, week-to-week stuff. And that's why you have your men's group to hold you accountable to that.
For people who have that kind of ability to go to these classes and change their mindset, how can they transfer that to their children potentially, especially if they're raising sons, to have them have a healthy understanding of their masculinity, their emotional expression, their ability to just be a better person?
Totally. Number one is modeling, right? So the more you can do yourself and the healthier man you can be, and the more honest you can be about not just your wins, but also your losses, right? Just that wave we were talking about earlier to your son, that is the number one thing you can do, right? It's just like, be honest, be the man that you want your son to be and talk about it, right? Can you over communicate it, right? Let your son really know what you're going through without asking him to take care of you, right? It's not that victim mentality, but just being like, hey, as a mentor, I need to tell you what it's like to be a man so you can start to organize, right? And then number two is, so masculine love, the way I kind of define it with my guys, is it's about setting the challenge and then coaching the guy to get there. So it's both, right? You set the challenge, hey, you're going to run a 5K, whatever, right? And then coaching to help you get there. I'm going to run with you over and over and over again, and we're going to train together until boom, you're at the challenge. And that's an art form, right? Like it's about setting the appropriate level of challenge, right? For some children, a 5K might be too much. It might be like, hey, we're going to run around the block. And for some kids, 5K might be too easy. Oh, we're going to do a marathon, whatever, right? And then coaching with love and compassion and judgment and non-judgment, like moving them up to meet it, is the love. So you're both kind of the challenge setter and the coach. And doing that with your son will bond the two of you together. It doesn't matter what you're doing, as long as it's a goal that like he cares about to some extent, right? And I think a lot of men fail because either they're one or the other, right? Again, back to those archetypes that you brought up, right? Like if you're the hustle guy, they just set challenges, right? You need to get a part-time job. And the kid's like, how do I do that? And it's like, fucking figure it out, right? Like there's no coaching. It's just like setting challenges. And then for the kind of more, I don't know, victim-y, don't want to work man, they're just coaching, right? They're like, I'll help you do whatever you want. It's cool. I'm on your side. No matter what, I got you. But there's no challenge. There's no goal, right? And the kid's like, well, I don't even know what I want. I'm like 8, like I need someone to give me a challenge that I can rise to. So that combination of challenge and setting a challenge and coaching is, I think, what creates strong boys. Because, like I said, like we grow through challenge. We grow through being just outside of our comfort zone and being forced to go that rung up, that next level, is what makes us stronger.
Do you also find that men who go to these kind of classes become better partners as well?
Definitely. Actually, I'll pause. There's two things. Either they become better partners or they divorce, right? And I see that
That's
with a
quite the
lot.
dichotomy.
Yeah, a lot of guys that get into self improvement, whether it's a retreat or a therapy or even spirituality, right? Oftentimes, if their partner is not doing it, they start to create distance between them, you know, because I think like as somebody starts to evolve and someone starts to develop more nuanced emotional language or starts to want to talk about their childhood traumas and starts to want to really deepen their connection, if they're not met in that space, it usually ends their relationship, quite frankly. So oftentimes, like if a man, again, heterosexual relationship, if a man is like doing a lot of therapy or a lot of self-development work and they're in a relationship, it's critical that their partner is doing it as well. And the partner can do their own path. Like they don't have to do it together, but like this idea of it's shared values, right? Like both having that value of self-improvement and getting better. Because I've seen it certainly tear marriages apart. If someone's progressing and the other person's stagnant, a lot of resentment gets built really quickly, unfortunately.
Is it also the ability for, if a woman has, say, been with a guy who doesn't really express their emotions, is that change of pace something that might be a problem as well, potentially?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Like any system is going to develop homeostasis. And the brain likes known and doesn't like unknown. And that's what it cares about. It doesn't care about good and bad. So even if the known thing is shitty, or if the known relationship is like emotionally dead, maybe it's sexually dead, maybe there's like nothing much going on, it's still known and the brain will cling on to that. Versus a new relationship might be better. It might be like more emotional, more sexually charged, more passionate, more interesting, but that's scary to the brain. So the brain's going to want to bring it back down to the status quo. So yeah, it will certainly cause issues, right? Because it's shifting the status quo. And, say you're a female partner and your guy starts talking about stuff. Oh shit, all of a sudden you have to start responding, like you have to start being more emotional. You have to start being more open. You have to start like meeting his needs. If he's like, hey, I have a need for, I don't know, gentle touch, or I have a need for space on Thursday nights to be with my dudes, right? Like if he's doing that emotional work, then you have to be able to step up and meet him there instead of minimizing or pushing it away. So it takes two. Everything takes two.
As a father, as a husband or a partner, there's obviously a lot of pressure to be the perfect dad or partner. How can someone become satisfied that they may not be the perfect father or partner, but be happy with being just good and doing their best?
Yeah, so the key to that is getting good at repair, right? So again, studies show, psychological research shows that perfection is obviously impossible. You don't need science to figure that out. But what they found is this process, what they call rupture and repair, is what's critical. So every relationship is going to have a rupture. That's your fight. That's your misunderstanding. That's your missed connection moment. But the work is getting good at repairing, which for men and women, I mean, anyone who's ego driven can be hard, is like saying I'm sorry and meaning it, and then actually changing your behavior, right? Actually repairing the situation, naming that dynamic of like, hey, you know what? Last night I was like pretty shitty to you, like preemptively saying things like that. Or, hey, if you're going into something like, hey, I'm kind of in a bad mood, didn't eat well, didn't sleep well. If I'm upset, it's not about you, right? Like any kind of open communication type of things is a way to start to repair those ruptures. And I find that that's critical. That's what the science says too. Also with kids, right? Like you're going to fuck your kid up. There's no way you're not. But if you can continue to repair that over time, it builds what's called a secure attachment. And the kid learns to trust you and love you because they know that, yeah, mistakes are going to happen, but you're always going to get back up one more time. And, coincidentally, I think that's a big masculine value. That goes back to courage that we talked about and dependability, right? The metaphor of like getting knocked off the horse and getting back on, that's very courageous. But as men, we have to get out of our ego's way and we have to admit that we got knocked off. I think a lot of guys struggle admitting that they messed up. But if you don't admit that, you don't have a chance to repair. You don't have a chance to recover. You're just like doubling down on a bad decision, which doesn't really go
I just want to end on this question. It's fairly open-ended, but I wanted to say, what's an idea that persists within our society that you want to see change in the near future that you think is wrong or is a bad interpretation at the moment?
Yeah, I think the big one, I'm not the first, obviously not the first one to say this, but I think the big one is the idea that courage is not having fear, whereas I think Jocko Willink was probably one of the best people to talk about this idea of courage is operating while afraid, you know? So what he says, Navy SEALs are not less afraid than other people, but they can operate while they're afraid. They don't let the fear dominate and control them. And I think that message needs to get out there of like, just because as a man we feel fear doesn't mean that we're weak, doesn't mean that we have to run away, doesn't mean that we have to like back away. And that this is physical fear and also emotional fear, right? Like if we're feeling a scary feeling or having a scary conversation, I hope that men can learn to lean into that, because that's what makes you a hero, right? Like the hero is still afraid of the dragon, right? But he goes after it anyway, and I think that is such a prototypical masculine thing, this idea of courage, being able to move through fear and accomplish great things while afraid versus, pretend like we're not afraid. Because I think there's a lot of good reasons to be afraid out there, but it doesn't mean that you're a weak man. It means that you have opportunities to grow.
If people want to find more of you, see more of your stuff, where should they look and where should they find you?
Yeah, so best thing is Men's Therapy Online, the company. The website is menstherapy.online. On there's everything. So we have a podcast, Men's Therapy Podcast. You can subscribe to that. We have free email courses that just kind of walk you through masculinity. We have, of course, all the stuff I've talked about, the individual therapy, the group, the retreats. We have a Slack community. We have a book club. We got all kinds of stuff. We got social media. We're on everything. But menstherapy.online is the way to go. That's going to be the hub for everything. Most of our offerings are free. We kind of just want to get the message out there to as many guys as possible and hopefully help build the great men of the next generation.
Marc, I've really enjoyed having you on. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, this is a great show. I appreciate the conversation. Thank you so much.